Thanks everyone who's signing in. We're going to start here in a couple of minutes, and we appreciate you joining us here today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Urban Natural Infrastructure Planning webinar. My name is Panos Gramis. I'm from the David Suzuki Foundation, and I'll be hosting you today. Many of you are still coming in, but we'll get the webinar started for you. We'd like to start today by giving a land acknowledgement of where we are. I'm personally hosting this webinar from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations here in Vancouver. I'm near specifically the site Sanok, which is near False Creek in Vancouver. And we have many people from joining throughout Canada. So if you'd like to acknowledge your host nation, you can put that in the chat. If you're unsure, you can check out the Native Land website. Trevor, maybe you could put that in the chat if that's easy for you to do. And I'd like to thank all the nations, throughout for their stewardship of these lands and waters from time immemorial. And so as we start today, I'll just give you a brief run through of what we'll be doing today. We've developed in concert with this group here that I'm going to introduce you to, a natural infrastructure map. So I'll start by introducing you to the panelists. Then we'll have a quick discussion about why and how the map was created, why the tool was created. Then we'll go through a demonstration of the map to show you just the functions of the map and how it works. Then we'll have a brief talk with the different panelists about how the map has been used and how it could be used in the communities. And then we will open the floor for questions. So we have a Q&A at the bottom. You could ask questions there in the Q&A, so questions for the panelists there. Any technical questions you would put in the chat if you could. But we'll definitely monitor those and ask those closer to about halfway through this webinar. So before we begin, I'd like to let you know that all this work has been made possible by the Roadberg Foundation with their funding to help make this map. And their ongoing support has allowed Habitat to really deepen their abilities of communities and planners to create more fair and equitable communities. So today's meeting, there was a question in the chat, will you receive the recording? Yes, so we are recording today's session. And after this meeting, we will share via email, because you registered via email. So we will share a recording of the map, a recording of this session. We'll share a link to the map so you can see it. And we'll also share contact information. So if you have questions beyond the webinar, that you can contact Habitat or me to do that. So yeah, rest assured, we will share those things. So I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. So I'll start with our friends at Habitat. Sylvia Wood, she's the Director of Science and Research with Habitat and has an expertise, her PhD in landscape ecology with a focus on biodiversity and ecosystem service modeling. So she has been involved in this project since its conception in collaboration with the David Suzuki Foundation since 2022. So this is like a long-term involved project. I'll also introduce you to Olivier Tanguay. He's the coordinator of the project team at Habitat. His specialty is forest ecology, ecosystem services valuation, and modeling, and he is really in charge of this project and bringing it forward. So another two guests that we have on the panel today, which I'm really excited to introduce you to. We have Jo Fitzgibbons from the City of Vancouver. She's an environmental specialist with the Ecological Services team at the City of Vancouver. She works to protect, enhance, and connect nature to the city. She's worked in policies, implemented projects related to daylighting streams, access to nature, green water infrastructure, environmental stewardship, climate resistance, so a whole suite of things. She has a master's degree in environmental planning and is nearing the completion of a PhD at UBC. So a lot of expertise from Jo. Thank you for joining us today. And we also have Shannon Dick from the City of Saskatoon. She's a sustainability specialist there. She coordinates the implementation of Saskatoon's green infrastructure strategy. She's also worked on climate change, water conservation, food, triple bottom line decision-making, waste management, and sustainable housing. So you can see where the intersection is for Shannon with this. She holds a master's from University of Saskatchewan School of Environmental and Sustainability. And she's also has a bachelor's in fine arts and a diploma in landscape design. So there's a whole convergence here with Shannon's expertise. So I'd like to open up, we're going to just open up with a conversation with the panelists about, what was the purpose of this map? How did we, what was sort of the gaps in what was available? So, I'll start just by asking Sylvia, what did you see missing from the current maps?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, panel. So I think one of the opportunities I've had with working with Habitat is having been able to work with a number of different cities, municipalities, and townships, both across Quebec, but also in other parts of Canada, helping them think through how they can manage natural infrastructure. And one of the fun challenges that came out of that work is sort of a recognition that each city is really distinct. There's a lot of variety and diversity in the way that nature is incorporated into those urban fabrics. And some of that's it's a historical legacy. Certain cities have inherited waterfalls or waterways or large forest spaces, and other cities have really made sort of systematic efforts to bring green space into their cities. And this has really led to a whole sort of panoply of different approaches to addressing challenges around nature in cities. But one of the things that we noticed was that in many cases, it was sort of being attacked from many different departments in the cities, and not everyone had the same pieces of information. So often, the forestry groups were managing the urban forest sections. The sustainability groups might have been looking at sort of distribution of parklands and who has access, but there wasn't a common space where people were bringing this knowledge together in a more common or standardized framework, which I think was leading potentially, or does lead to fragmented planning, with not necessarily all the information flowing between all the different relevant groups. And so one of our motivations behind the development of this framework and this tool was to think about, well, how could we try to bring together information that's often disparate across different departments and bring it into a common space to look at together, and also a common set of ways to understand and analyze it. And this was really, I think, an innovative or interesting way of trying to attack this approach, because it really brings everyone to the table together.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And also, I'd just like to maybe point out, maybe just talk a little bit about, and feel free, Jo or Shannon, to talk about that. I think it makes it also more accessible to people, just that you don't have to be a planner to use this as well. Like, it has a lot of depth in the layers, which we'll go through. But
definitely, I think we wanted to also make it less technical. A lot of work around natural infrastructures and that understanding can be quite technical, but having something that's visual that people can interact with was also sort of a key objective of trying to pull this work together and make it as accessible for a local resident in the city to explore what's the nature that's around them, as potentially someone within the city who's responsible for planning the urban forestry or developing the urban forestry plan. And I think one of the other points that I maybe didn't touch on was also the spatial element of nature. So where nature is in cities matters, because this is the place where people actually interact with nature the most on a day-to-day basis. Even in Canada, we think about our great wild outdoors, but those are far away and maybe we get to visit once in a while. But cities are the space where actually most people have contact with nature, whether it's through like a community garden or going for a morning walk along a river. And so understanding how that nature is distributed in cities can also be really important to making sure that everyone has equitable access.
Great. So maybe I'll just put it to you, Shannon, like and you can talk about in Saskatoon, like what kinds of work you were doing or what attracted you to just to really assist Habitat with, the problems that they were looking at addressing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the opportunity, I think, to work with David Suzuki Foundation Habitat came at a good time because we were already looking into how to track the quality, quantity, connectivity, and equity of our green network. So we had started to establish some key performance indicators in our green network, which we're hoping to finalize over the next year or so. We're trying to create a data management system to help us store, track, and report on this information. And we're also looking at how to incorporate natural infrastructure into our asset management plans. So this visual representation that Habitat created has been really useful to see the different kind of layers of information, not just the ecological data that we provided, but also the socioeconomic statistics, which we hadn't kind of ever been able to visualize before.
Awesome. Great. And Joe, like as far as like, just you're thinking about, there are many people from other communities here, like how, because I think explaining, in the way that Shannon did, what attracted you to be part of this?
For sure, yeah. In the city of Vancouver, so I'm in a group that's been working on developing our first kind of green network tool, I guess, for the city. So looking at inventorying our sensitive ecosystems and trying to understand what additional protections they might need and how to also build connectivity between those spaces. So we were kind of, again, like on the same sort of train of thought, I think, as what Sylvia was speaking to and Shannon was also mentioning, of really noticing that a lot of this work was happening in different departments in the city and really wanting to try to pull it together. So I think this tool has done a really great job of that. It's really cool to see. And I think in some ways, although we have different departments that have been doing some of those analyses, there really is power in kind of having it all in one place. And I think for us also just where we're at in our progress, like this Habitat project was sort of happening in tandem as our analysis on the green network. And so having a second data point was also really valuable, and being able to kind of reference and validate. PhD Sylvia maybe relates to this too, but just like as a scientist, I think that was really gratifying as well, to be able to see that the work that we were doing was kind of matching what this external ish party was also finding in their spatial analysis. So
great. Yeah, no, it really is exciting. Like to me, like, from the outside looking in at the maps and being able to understand, or feel like I can understand some of the patterns just much more quickly than it would through a different explanation, just having the spatial analysis easily seen. So what I'd like to do at this point is have Sylvia will just walk you through just sort of the logical framework of how the map was developed. And while she gets that set up, I'll just remind you that we're going to be sharing a recording of this afterwards if you came in late. We also will be sharing contact information for Habitat and for myself. One thing I would also just like to point out is, we have about 270 people on the call today. So what's also exciting to me is to see how many people are really interested in this. I think this is something that, I've been working at the Suzuki Foundation. I'm literally into my third decade. And there's a real excitement to me to see this kind of work coming together, looking at socioeconomic and accessibility and equity in planning. It's always been there, but I think the tools, the sophistication of the tools, and I think the sophistication of the understanding has really come a long way, even in just the last 5 to 10 years. So I'll hand it over to Sylvia. She can walk you through the sort of the conception, and then we'll come back and remind you that we will go through and give you a point by point, like actually have Olivier going through the map and showing you how it works. So go ahead, Sylvia. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again, Panos. So I've entitled this part of the presentation, Show Me the Benefits. improving equity and resilience of urban nature. So I think that's what I really want to focus on, is thinking about nature as providing benefits to people. And we need to think about how to share those benefits equitably, both amongst people, but also thinking about how those benefits may change through time. So what I want to present to you today is the work that we've been doing with 5 cities across Canada over the past 2 years. So we've been working with the city of Vancouver out on the West Coast, the city of Saskatoon in the Prairies, Ottawa and Gatineau in central Canada, and a bit further east, the city of Quebec. And it's been great to bring on board 5 cities that have very different landscapes and very different contexts, because it really helped us to think through how we could develop a framework to guide natural infrastructure planning in cities and municipalities and townships that work in many different types of contexts. And one of the key elements of this was this focus on trying to bring in the spatial dimension when we want to understand our natural infrastructures. And so this framework really focuses on providing that sort of spatial understanding of where our natural infrastructures are in cities, and what are the benefits that those infrastructures are providing, and where are those benefits provided across cityscapes, thinking about who has access to those benefits, and finally, are those benefits at risk from climate change? So do we expect that some of our ecosystems that are healthy today might not be as resilient and robust in the future as a result of climate change? And so those were sort of 3 core elements that we wanted to make sure fit into our framework to help cities think about how to plan more equitable and resilient ecosystems for everybody. And because this is spatial, it really lends itself well to building a spatial tool, so an interactive mapping platform to visualize those results. So that was another objective, is to develop a space where both more technical people, urban planners and developers can explore data, but also that a regular citizen can also understand the nature that's around them. And so this could be used also as a tool potentially between cities and their residents to help talk about and think about plans for nature in their cities. So as Panos mentioned, in the next few slides, I'm going to really talk sort of more on a conceptual level about the framework and how it was put together. And then afterwards, I'm going to pass the baton over to my colleague, Olivier, who's going to do a demo of that map and show you what's under the hood. First of all, we felt that if we could answer these 3 questions, we would have a pretty good understanding of the state of nature in cities as it relates to some of the challenges that urban planners are confronted with. And so first of all is understanding where is natural infrastructure distributed across a town or municipality or a city? What are the benefits that it provides? When I speak about benefits, I'm usually referring to the ecosystem services that nature provides. So we can think about cooling effects of trees and forests, or water retention from green spaces, or just leisure and recreation activities. And then thirdly, understanding who has access to both that nature and the benefits that come from it. And so we feel that if we can understand these 3 elements of your natural infrastructures, it was a pretty good diagnosis of the state of affairs. And that knowing that could help us to develop plans to promote environmental equity in those towns and cities when we could cross it with other socioeconomic indicators. But it could also help us think through how to make these natural infrastructures more resilient to climate by crossing that same amount of information with climate indicators. And so what I'm going to do is to walk you through how we did each of those first 3 steps and give a quick example of how it could be applied to promote environmental equity. Where is natural infrastructure? As I alluded to in the questions that Panos asked me, it's often scattered in terms of data across many different departments. So our first challenge is to generate a common understanding of what natural infrastructure is and the data sets that we have to represent it. So in this work, we focus on primarily on 4 types of natural infrastructures. Public trees, so these are trees that the city manages. They're typically those that are in front of your house, along streetways, or in parks. We also focus on sort of remnant natural ecosystems, so woodlots and woodlands and wetlands that are still part of those landscapes. And then lastly, public parks, green spaces that the city manages to provide a range of activities and benefits, whether it be sports grounds or community gardens, or just areas to gather for cultural events. And so for each one of these, we tried to work with cities to identify whether they already had an existing data set that would allow us to understand the distribution across their landscape. For public trees, we looked at inventories that cities tend to keep which is it has a spatial location for each tree and some information about what species it is. For woodlands and woodlots, those tend to be sort of large areas that have been mapped in different types of data forms. So whether it's a polygon or delimitation, we try to integrate those. And finally, for other types of public spaces, it could be a combination of data sets that came from the city, but also things like OpenStreetMap. And so the first step was really to integrate all of those into a common framework to be able to map the distribution of natural infrastructures in a town or municipality. The second question, what benefits does it provide? So for this step, we tried to look at as many ecosystem services as we were able to quantify. So we were able to look at 6 different characteristics that provide benefits, whether to people locally or to the community at large. So the first of these was carbon. This is carbon storage and sequestration. It is often done by trees in their biomass and their leaves, as well as in the soils and wetlands. We also looked at how those infrastructures improve air quality. So trees can filter out pollutants that have negative impacts on our health and our well-being. We looked at water regulation. How do small infrastructures like bioswales or green spaces or wetlands contribute to reducing potential local flooding? How do any of these ecosystems help to mitigate heat islands that are coming through cities? So cities are getting confronted with more and longer heat waves each summer. The evapotranspirated process that plants undergo help to keep it cool. And so where they are in a city can have important implications on who gets exposed to heat and who doesn't. And we also looked at ecological connectivity because we want our green spaces and our natures to be vibrant and to have biodiversity. And so we need to make sure that habitats are connected and species are able to move through our city. And lastly, we looked at how parks are distributed to understand who's gaining access to them. And so when we put all of those different layers together, so each one of those represented a spatial layer where we looked at the distribution across the landscape. But what we can do is we can then stack those layers and normalize them and add them together to produce what we call a benefit scape. And so what you see here in the map of Saskatoon is the benefit scape where we have added the value of each of those ecosystem services together, and then to highlight areas where there's a large number of benefits being provided and areas where there are less ecosystem services or benefits being provided. So what you see here in bright yellow are areas with high benefit provision. So they tend to be in sort of the south central area of Saskatoon. And then we also see areas sort of as we move away from the center that are in darker colors of blue or purple. And those tend to be areas with less ecosystem services or benefits provided. The other important thing to note on this map is that we've aggregated the data to the level of the census dissemination area. So this is the smallest unit in the Canadian census, and it regroups about 700 residents of fairly homogeneous socioeconomic status. And this can be really interesting because it allows us to understand, how many people are living in these areas and who has access to that data or to those benefits. And this leads quite naturally into trying to figure out, okay, well, who are those 700 residents that are in my areas of high benefit, and who are those 700 residents that are sitting in my areas of low service provision? And this could be very important when cities are trying to think about intervention plans or new development that could potentially promote environmental equity. So if we can combine that ecosystem data with socioeconomic indicators, we might be able to draw insights about how different interventions might be important in different areas. This is, again, the city of Saskatoon. And here what we've done is we've taken that previous layer of ecosystem benefits and we've crossed it with a socioeconomic indicator from the Canadian census. In this case, we're looking at the median income of households in each one of those dissemination areas. So to read the map, the darker the color blue means that those areas are receiving more benefits than others. And the darker the shade of pink are areas with higher median incomes. And so if you happen to be in an area with a very dark blue color or purple color, they tend to be areas with high benefits and high income. Conversely, if we're in these areas with gray color, that means that we're actually receiving very few ecological benefits and have relatively low median income. And so when we look again at the city of Saskatoon, what we can see is that area in the South Central District that sort of popped up as being bright yellow in terms of providing a lot of ecosystem services and benefits also shows up in these darker tones of blue and purple. So this suggests, as we mentioned, that it has high service provision and that is predominantly going to either people of median or high income. Conversely, there's unfortunately quite a few areas with gray or light pink values. So those are areas with relatively low median income and also quite low service provision. And so these might be areas where cities might want to consider different types of management plans to try to bring back nature into those areas or provide other mechanisms for those residents to compensate for the loss of those services. So you can imagine in an area that is maybe affected by heat wave, that the cooling effect and the heat island effect might impact communities that are not able to afford air conditioning more than communities that have access to those other types of services. So that's just a quick overview of the framework and how we try to mobilize it with each city. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Olivier to give you a sneak peek of the mapping tool.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm going to share my screen to show you what we've done. Okay, let's go. So I think you are seeing my screen right now. So this is the landing page to access to the map. And as Sylvia mentioned earlier, we've created a framework to know where are the natural infrastructures, which benefits are provided, who has access, and also a part about more the resiliency of the natural infrastructures. So quickly on this landing page, you have a couple information about the project, how we've created the ideas behind the project. We have also a couple of statistics about the project because, as Sylvia mentioned, we've developed a framework. So the methodology we used from a city to another are the same. So we are able to compare some statistics between the cities. And most of the data set we used are public data sets, or sometimes the city provides some data set as well. And by having mostly public data sets, it allows us to replicate this framework everywhere in Canada. So I don't want to go too much on the statistic we've created. We just want to dive in a map right away. So let's go to Saskatoon because we took the example of Saskatoon. So here is our map of Saskatoon, and because it's the first time we are using it, I'm gonna go through a tutorial. So as Sylvia mentioned, the map it's made for urban planners but also citizens. So we want it pretty user-friendly for everyone. So there is a little tutorial button on the top left corner of your screen, and we will just follow the steps together because it's the first time for most of you about this map. So if we click on a tutorial button, you will have a couple of steps to follow to see what is displayed on your screen. So this first text box, it's about the layer selection. So you have two text boxes. The first one, it's about the main theme you want to select about what you are displaying on the screen. And then the second one will be the layer you want to see. Below this little two text box, there is the legend. So right now we are looking at the natural infrastructures of Saskatoon. So there is a different color for each of the natural infrastructure we took in account in our project. Then below that, here there is a little description about what you are seeing right now on the screen. So it helps people who don't have much knowledge about what it's on a map. So here it's a natural infrastructure. It's and easy to understand, but some layers might be more difficult to understand. And if you want to dive deeper on the analysis, there is a methodology button where you can click, and then you will have the full access to the methodology we use to develop the specific analysis. You will have like the software we use, for example, because most of the analysis we've done are through modeling. So yeah, the software we use, also the reference, the scientific article we've read to be able to do our analysis. Below that, there is this opacity cursor where you can just if you want to see through a little bit more or less of the layer which is displayed. Then on the top left, there is a tab called Data and Metadata. It's a tab where you are able to access you are able to download all the data sets which are in a map. And there is also like a metadata document and a methodology report to understand what we've done. So I think this tab, it's really useful for the planners, because you will be able to download the data and play with them afterwards. And if I keep going, there is here another tab. It's about other cities. So if you click on these, you will be able to access to the other cities map. And finally here, it's just if we want to go back to the home page. So the page here, you just have to go here. So that's how the map work, and we can play around a little bit. So you can really move around, you can zoom in, zoom out. And because Sylvia talked about the natural infrastructures and the ecosystemic services, we will go on this theme. So I would click here, and here you see we have a drop-down menu with all our main themes. So we will go on providing ecosystem services, and then there is several layers you can display. I don't want to go through all of them. You will have the link to the maps after to explore yourself. Here it's just a sneak peek, as I mentioned. So this layer, as was presented by Sylvia, it's the benefitscape. So the stacking of all the ecosystem services. And where it's the more yellow, it's where there is a lot of value. So for example, if we zoom it a bit in this neighborhood, like there is a lot of value, it seems we can just change a bit the opacity to see, and there is a lot of green, lots of trees, lots of parks as well. So it's, yeah, lots of value. But here, for example, if we look again at the benefitscape, there is not much. And it's really like, you can see it right away because not many natural infrastructure. Couple trees in the backyard here, but otherwise not much. So that's for the benefitscape. And Sylvia talked also about how to improve environmental equity. And it's to do that, we will use this map and add social economic indicator. So crossing benefits and social economic indicator. And we're gonna just quickly look at that. So we would go on a theme, providing ecosystem services according to different social economic criteria. So let's go here, and here we have a couple of them. If you download the data set, there will be more of these criteria. We didn't want to have too many on the map. So here there is only the fifth, the more relevant for us, we can say. So the median income, for example, if we want, let's take an example, the city have some money to add natural infrastructures and they don't know where they can do it. So by using this analysis, you can see, for example, if we go a bit in this neighborhood, like the benefits are really low because the sale is gray and the median income is really low as well. You can see here the median income after tax is around 72,000 a year. Here is 76, so it's the lowest at the city scale. But we can't really rank right now all this little dissemination area. They all have the same kind of value as benefit and median income, but we can use the other social economic indicator to kind of try to rank this area. So if we look at the situational vulnerability, which is an indicator looking at the education of people, how much the housing needs major repairs, it's help us to rank which neighborhood you would like to add natural infrastructure first. So before everything was graying here, but now you can see this specific neighborhood is like the highest rank in situational vulnerability. So it means the people there are more in needs of like just nature, or they are more vulnerable because of their situation. So as a city, might be a good idea to start implementing natural infrastructure in these places. So this is just a quick sneak peek of the map. As I mentioned earlier, you will have the link after to just go in it. And because there is a lot of analysis we've done, but we don't have all the time to show all of them for just an hour. It was a 2.5 years project. We were several, like I'm not only the only one, and Sylvia either, to be part of this project. So yeah, just a quick sneak peek, and I let Panos keep going for this discussion.
Thank you so much, Olivier and Sylvia, for showing us through that. Yeah, I think we could each spend many hours playing around with the different data layers and just seeing the types of things that are here. So we are going to open up the floor to questions. We have some questions already in the Q&A. So please go ahead and put those into the Q&A section. I wanted to just emphasize right away that the socioeconomic data that Olivier and Habitat are using is nationally available. That's correct. So this is something that can be applied nationally as well. So right off the bat, I just wanted to, you've done this work. Like, how do you envision, cities or municipalities or even small towns using this kind of tool? Because this is really just a template. This can be created and applied to many different places, right? This is not just, oh, we've done this for these cities and that's all there is. Maybe you can just talk about that a bit.
Okay, I can start, and Sylvia, you can add information. So yeah, I don't know if we mentioned that at the beginning, but it's a pilot project. So we worked with these 5 cities, and we've developed the methodologies. We had brainstorms with all the Habitat team for some of the analysis. And because, as I mentioned, we use mostly public data set, and the methodology are similar from a city to another, and all the data sets are Canadian-wide, we can apply it pretty much everywhere. So it's just a prototype, but we would be really happy to have more cities participating to this kind of initiative. Yeah. Sylvia?
Yeah, I think the challenges faced by towns, cities, and municipalities of different sizes, there are some commonalities, but there are also some differences. And so I think in the framework that we're showing today is that we really try to bring as many different components together to respond to whatever the challenge it is that those communities are facing, but that it could be also adapted depending on maybe the scale of the city or the types of challenges or its geographic situation. So not all of these layers are maybe relevant for each city, but to think about, for a smaller municipality, heat waves might be less of an issue. They have less sort of built up infrastructure, but they might be just as a risk to other challenges like flooding, et cetera, where this would be very relevant. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to think about which parts of this tool are relevant for different municipalities and different cities and scales. And so I think it's a very flexible framework that can be applied at many levels.
Great. So this is a question, and Shannon and Joe, I mean, I know this is like you've just been presented this, with your cities in the last month or so. Have you sort of seen any sort of shift in the way that you're thinking about these things, or how you would envision your city working with this tool over the next, weeks, months, potentially years?
Yeah, I can start if that's okay, Joe. Yeah, so the city of Saskatoon, I mean, we have an urban forest management plan, we have a climate adaptation plan, we have a green infrastructure strategy, and natural infrastructure plays a role in each of those, and they kind of overlap between those strategies. So this tool has been a good, I guess, starting point to identify opportunities to achieve the goals set out in those plans, such as Saskatoon's canopy cover target. You may have noticed that our canopy cover is quite low, but we're not a historically or naturally forested city. So we do want to know, where we can get the best benefit out of our canopy and which locations would benefit most. And also just kind of help us identify where we should focus some of our other efforts. And my colleague has already used the tool, which is really amazing. Specifically, she's working on heat response in our city, and she's looking at the heat island map overlaid with some of the socioeconomic maps to help them select sites for their spray pad improvement project. So that's intended to provide cooling stations in parks for those that are most impacted by heat in our city. And also the project will lead to additional green space enhancements in areas where green spaces are quite degraded. So that's just one like early example of how our team has used the tool, and I'm sure there'll be more opportunities to inform our green space, climate adaptation, and urban forestry work.
Wow, that's a great story. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this project fits really well as a part of the evidence base, you know, kind of supporting the work that we're trying to do with our ecological network here in Vancouver. So we've been, you know, for instance, trying to, part of our motive for inventorying sensitive ecosystems in the city was to start to eventually, identify some mechanisms to protect and conserve what little of those natural areas we have left in the city. Vancouver is obviously, it's the densest city in Canada, so there's not a lot, left, and we have a lot of restoration work ahead of us in order to achieve our ecological vision. So having a tool like this is really, it's a part of the evidence base, which is really great. It helps us benchmark against other cities as well to kind of help people understand like actually how acute some of the challenges we face. You know, we have this identity as like the world's greenest city. We love to say that about Vancouver. But actually we do have some challenges really around a lack of natural infrastructure and really uneven exposure. So I think this map does a really good job of demonstrating that. And I think something that I'm really excited about here also is, Shannon mentioned data management system earlier, and I think that this tool is really inspiring as a way of thinking about how we might do that as at a cross department level too, like starting to bring together the different analyses into an interactive tool like this and seeing what a powerful communication tool that is has definitely, I think, got the wheels turning for us about how we might serve that role within our organization and be able to kind of curate things in that sort of way. So yeah, I'll be following up with Olivier and Sylvia for sure with some ideas about that later.
Great. Thank you, Joe. So one question I have, and Sylvia, and this is, we're talking, Saskatoon, Vancouver, these are big cities. Like have you worked with smaller municipalities or small towns, local governments? Like how do you see the tool being used there?
Yeah, and so I think one of the strategies we tried to employ was to get a range of city sizes involved, at least in this pilot phase. So probably one of our smaller cities is the city of Gatineau, which is just across the river from Ottawa. And one of the challenges for them especially was lack of data. In many cases, smaller communities don't necessarily have the budgets to maintain up-to-date inventories or other products that allow them to pull these together. And so I think one of the challenges often for smaller communities is to find tools that they can apply to their landscapes, even if they don't have all this stuff previously put together. And I think that this tool lends itself quite well in that there are different ways to go and try to build the data that goes into this. If they have an inventory, fantastic. If they don't, can we develop one quite quickly based on remote sensing? Can we use OpenStreetMap to help map some of these spaces out, or as a first run that can be refined with cities as they move forward? And so I think obviously the more data we have, the more depth that we can bring to the analyses, but it's something that I think that cities are sort of generally working towards in terms of building their inventories and their data sets through time, and working on something like this could also help them to take a step up already in providing those data sets for their own departments and decision-making processes.
Great. So thank you so much. Yeah. So like when you just a really specific, like Gatineau is still a fairly big place comparatively.
Sure.
So
yeah.
like would a town of like 750 or like 2,000 be able to use this tool? Like, is that within reason? Like what's the scale?
Yeah, I think it really, as I mentioned before, it comes down to what are the challenges that the municipality is facing and how they see natural infrastructure as part of that solution. So if it's a small community that's very impacted by, as I mentioned, either flooding or another type of challenge, thinking about, okay, are there data that's relevant at that scale for them, and trying to mobilize that. And usually there are. And so maybe it's not all of the different indicators that we want to go and find, but just the ones that are really going to help them inform the challenges that they're up against today. And so, as we said, we do most of this work at a very fine scale in terms of the analyses themselves, that at about 30-meter or less resolution, that we're aggregating up to these dissemination areas. And so as long as your municipality has at least some minimum number of dissemination areas, I think there's something that can be done that's quite useful for informing decisions.
Great, thank you. And they can always just contact you.
Yeah, exactly, just to reach out. I think Victoire put a link in the chat already with regards to that.
Great, thank you so much. So we have still about 15 minutes left in the webinar. I will let you know that we are planning to stay for people who have deeper questions. We will keep this going after the hour so that you can continue the conversation, but we do have 50 minutes. We have a lot of really great questions here. I'll do my best to get through them. So one of the first ones, and they range quite a lot between like sort of very high level to very specific, but I wanted to start, there's a number of questions people asking about how you differentiate between the benefit of, let's say, a grassland versus like a sports field versus tree canopy versus wetland. If you look at native and non-native species, like how do you define and how do you sort of differentiate between those things? And obviously, you know, like you have to have some scale, but it's really just to make it as, you have to draw the line somewhere, but just how are you doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, especially working in Saskatoon, which is such a different ecosystem from some of the other cities that we've worked with, helped challenge us on this idea, because it's obviously a grassland ecosystem by nature. And actually, we found some really interesting reverse tendencies where the city is actually cooler than much of the surrounding landscape because they have a tree planting initiative. But one of the ways that we've been trying to take advantage or trying to take into consideration the value of the different types of ecosystems is first by looking at multiple benefits. So not just benefits provided by trees, but also this sort of infiltration, which can be provided by any green space, or evaporative cooling, that all these different types of ecosystem services contribute differentially depending on which ecosystem you're in. And then secondly, when we do the summary of the benefitscape, we're relativizing each of those different layers, to the area of the landscape that provides the most versus a bit less of the services. And so it's not that some green spaces are completely ignored, it's just that they're put into a relative ranking by service. So if they're very high for one service, that will come out, and if they're very low for another service, that will also be visible. And so it can help us to understand what services or benefits do we think different types of ecosystems are providing. But I think that this is a great question, because we'd love to, and it's one thing that we have in mind, is to try to think about how can we include other benefits that maybe, we tend to have a focus in Canada on tree systems and tree ecosystems, but we know that our landscape is composed of a lot of other types of ecosystems. So adding other ecosystem services, which might help to bring out those other spaces as benefit providers, is something we'd like to do in the future.
Great. Did anyone else want to jump in on that? Okay, so I'll go. This next question is very, much more technical. It's from someone from the city of Kelowna, sorry. And they're asking, what kind of spatial regression models are you using to ensure the effect of surrounding dissemination areas is kept into account? So is there anything you want to talk about there?
Well, I can take it first, and then I'll let Olivier if he has anything to add. We're using tools that, as Olivier mentioned, are public tools or open source tools. So iTree obviously is one of them to look at the urban canopy, but we're also using ones that are provided by the Natural Capital Project called Invest, and those tend to have spatial dependencies built into them. So in terms of things like heat, understanding if there's a park that's 300 meters away, to what degree do we have a cooling effect that's reaching my local neighborhood, are taken into account through that modeling framework provided by that tool. Same thing with connectivity. The models that we're using, they're actually the models that we've developed at Habitat, but they're really looking at the relationship of one neighborhood versus another, and how an animal might move through that landscape in order to cross the city or to find the next available habitat patch. So really taking it as a holistic view of the city. But those are some of the ways in which that sort of spatial dependency between management units is taken into account.
Great.
I don't know, is there any other points you wanted to raise?
No, I think it's a great explanation, and when you will have the link, you can go through our methodology to better understand how it was done. But yeah, I would just keep it short here.
Yeah. So here's just a very, it's sort of back to like a high level question is, what was the choice around talking about it as urban natural infrastructure rather than green infrastructure? Was there a choice there really? Is that something?
Oh, well, for us at least, we'd started off with green infrastructure, and then we quickly found that in the government lingo of green infrastructure, that often related actually to gray-oriented infrastructure that helped to either improve a carbon, like reduce the carbon footprint or improve a water efficiency. And it was really focused on that element of efficiency provided by traditionally gray infrastructure. And so in order to not confound those two things by putting the word nature and natural, we very much are clear that we're talking about ecosystems, whether they be semi-natural or natural ecosystems, and their role in cities, rather than green, which could be misinterpreted as potentially also referring to gray infrastructures.
Great.
I'd also, chime in here, if you don't mind. Yeah, when we developed our green infrastructure strategy, we were calling it green infrastructure at the time. Since then, we've tried to align more with kind of federal language. And so the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment have a statement paper on natural infrastructure, and it shows kind of a spectrum. And so we've looked at that. We started to change our language to natural infrastructure in part because it shows kind of the full spectrum, including natural areas. And a lot of our early work, our first work, has been focused on natural area conservation, management, and policy work. And so, and our green infrastructure strategy talks about that. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't just assuming we're looking at kind of stormwater management in downtown Saskatoon as green infrastructure. We're looking at the full spectrum. So it was just a more inclusive word for the types of work that we're engaged in.
And maybe I just also jump onto that, is that another sort of movement that we've heard from municipalities is an interest to value their natural assets in cities. So these ecosystems and semi-natural spaces, and providing sort of an estimate of their abundance, their quality, their condition, and their value. And so I think by using natural infrastructures, it makes a more direct link when you want to go to an asset valuation approach.
My only tiny addition to add, I agree with all of these things. In the city of Vancouver, we use green infrastructure to refer to like specifically stormwater infrastructure. And there's also blue infrastructure that I think is relevant to include here. So yeah, the language we use like arose by any other name kind of thing, but I like natural infrastructure because of that inclusivity, and yeah, also because it tends not to get as conflated with like other kind of more specific terms as much.
Great. And I think in some ways it speaks to like particularly the socioeconomic factors, like the people's just enjoyment, use, and need for it. And on that note, I'll mention someone in here was asking about, they're a senior and they have mobility issues, and they find it hard to get to parks and trees, and they need walkways to go for a walk. Is there anything in there about the accessibility as well and how that plays into this? So that you look at it spatially, but what about sort of specific accessibility in parks? I mean, that's a very fine scale, but is there anything that you want to mention about that?
Yeah, I can answer for that. So we haven't presented this analysis, but we've done an analysis to look where exactly are the parks in a city and how many people can reach the park according to a specific distance. So we took a distance of 300 meters and just we were looking how many people were going to these parks. And it's really maybe the basic approach, but we could refine that by saying according to the demography. So for example, the age, saying people like senior people might just walk only 200 meters, and people in a bit younger can walk 500 meters, stuff like that. So we've done this analysis. Yeah.
Great. And I think in some ways too, is that like the map would allow the cities to look at where there is accessibility, where people are in need of that, and then address that through using the map to see where that problem needs to be addressed. So thanks for that question. I will note we're really basically at like coming up to time here. I'll try to answer a couple more questions. We are going to go over, but I know some for people who have the time, we will go over the hour to answer more questions. But I just am going to look at. We have a question here, which I think is an important one from someone in Kingston. They have two different projects underway. Natural heritage planning, and that's in the planning department, and then forest management, which is in the public works department. So do any of you, and maybe Sylvia or sorry, Shannon or Joe, you can comment on like this siloed approach, like how do you sort of bridge that? How do you see this map being helpful in bridging some of that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, I would say. I think the map is really, sorry, there was loud noise in my environment here, but I think maps like this are really great as a sort of anchor for dialogue between departments. So it might not necessarily be like I think one of the things that we found staff and consultants are kind of constantly pumping out new analyses and new data sets. And so like the ability of I really think the power in this tool is actually like the methodology that you've created here and the framework and the platform. And the specific data and the findings are great, but they're a snapshot in time, right? So that's the thing that I'm the most excited about, and for exactly that reason, because it is a kind of an opportunity to have a reason to reach out and have those conversations, I think, with other departments to kind of bring people together and try to put things in that common place. It's definitely, generated some conversations here in Vancouver across different departments. We realized, I think, through this process in part, that other departments were doing similar sorts of natural asset analyses and kind of thinking about scenarios and that sort of thing in the future too. And so, yeah, I think, any one tool can't necessarily solve all the issues, but having it available, I think, even and having it as a place, having a steward, I think, to kind of bring all of that together is one piece of the puzzle in addressing the silo issue, which every municipality struggles with.
Great.
Yeah, I think the mapping tool has been a good place to start. Like Joe mentioned, if we had really robust data on, we do have locations of our heritage assets, but what we'd like to do is have a better understanding of our cultural assets, and that's a much more complicated process that's going to require some really deep engagement with our community and with Indigenous organizations as well. And so we'd like to build out what that is so that we can overlay it with something like our Green Network map, but we're not there yet. I'd also just there's got to be other conversations happening beyond simply a planning tool like a map. And so, for example, at the City of Saskatoon, we just held last year for the first time something we called Green Network Connect, and it brought together staff members from departments that either might be able to include natural infrastructure in their projects or who have impact on natural infrastructure in the city. Put them all in the same room, had lots of different discussion groups to talk about how do you resolve some of these tricky conflicts between maybe active transportation or sidewalks and trees or heritage assets and trees, or any kind of where we have mandates to do both, but how do you do both in certain situations? So I think if there are people in your municipality that can kind of be those can have those bridging conversations, we've started to make progress on that in the last few years. Got a long ways to go, but the conversations have to be, in my opinion, kind of human to human, and not just stop at a planning tool. You need to have those conversations and relationships built within the organization to do this type of work effectively.
Thank you so much, Shannon. That's I think that is really an important part of this, because a lot of times people say, well, what if, this part of this or this, the tool is just a tool, and it really just brings you to a point where then you have these human to human conversations, you have these community conversations. And this, again, I think it looks to me, it's designed, I'm not an expert in this field at all. I feel really comfortable looking at this tool and getting a sense of what these things are, but ultimately it comes back to a responsibility for citizens, for political leaders and communities to come together and really work these things out and recognize where it is. And people, no matter what, on the ground know what places are accessible when there's a deficit in nature. And really, this just helps to highlight those things. So we are at time. So I will just reiterate, the question of like, how do we reach out? How do we find out about, more about the tool? We will send an email out that has information and questions that you've asked, links to the map, contact information for folks from Habitat and from the Suzuki Foundation to help continue this. We will stay on for at least another 30 minutes to help answer some. We've got 42 questions. We've had up to 280 people in the conversation. Thank you so much for participating, and if you want to stay on, we'll be happy to answer your questions. I just wanted to thank all of the panelists. I also wanted to thank our technical support from Trevor Leach from the David Suzuki Foundation and Victor Poujon from Habitat. That really helped us to do it. Thanking the Roberg Foundation for their financial contributions and just their real enthusiasm and support for this project. Joe Fitzgibbons from the City of Vancouver, Shannon Dick from the City of Saskatoon, taking time out of your day, and also really just all of your thought and input into the creation of this map and in your suggestions. There is a French language webinar tomorrow. Same, Olivia and Sylvia were part of that, and we have people from Gatineau and Quebec City who are going to be participating about that. We will share the recording. You are welcome to share the recording with people that you'd like to share it with. And thanks for your interest and commitment to good dialogue. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And if I could add, if there are people who have any questions or interest in this tool, to please reach out to us at Habitat. We're happy to answer your questions. Also, if you're thinking about how to finance this type of work, we've also identified a couple of different opportunities that might be possible to pursue. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any thoughts or questions regarding that as well.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, because obviously it comes down to, how can you afford, how can you pay for these things? And there are many opportunities for that. Okay, we still have a lot of people here. We still have about 150 people roughly. So do you want to talk a bit about that with the financing part and the funding, because that is really really critical, right?
Yeah. And so I think this work, as both Shannon and Joe have mentioned, helps to fit in and to inform a lot of different sort of policy opportunities, and that oftentimes there are granting opportunities to help finance that work. So we know that there are opportunities with both the 2 billion trees and the green financing from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which might be one mechanism for different municipalities to apply for funding to help do some of this initial work around inventories and actual implementation of that work too, when you have decided what you want to do to help finance the actual implementation. I think there's a few other groups out there who are also around like climate resilience. This might be sort of a first step down a pathway of a climate plan. And so there might be opportunities to leverage funding opportunities provided by provincial or federal governments. This would be sort of a first step into that process. It can be available for those. And so I think it's also to think about, how are you hoping to use these data sets and how could they inform the next step? Because I think there's a lot of opportunities to move this forward, and provinces want to see cities taking on the natural infrastructure part, both in a climate resilience, but also, as we mentioned, the sort of equity story as well. And so hopefully there are lots of opportunities that are also going to become available in the future to help cities do this type of planning.
Great. So we have some questions around using this, like, would this be available for use in the north? Would this be available for use in specific communities? Do you want to just talk about that a bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about the different challenges that communities in the far north might face, and whether all of the tools that we've developed to date are applicable. So I think that's a great question for us to really reflect on, especially as we move out of traditional forest ecosystems into more peatland, taiga, Arctic situations, that we might be needing to think about a different suite of services and benefits that those landscapes provide, but also the risks that are confronting those communities. So I think I'll take that on as a challenge rather than saying, yes, it absolutely applies immediately, but for us to think about how can we potentially adapt it to the challenges that those communities face.
Great. One thing that you did talk about before, and I think it's in some of the statistics, is looking at, like, if this is a national program, that you can actually compare where cities, how sort of cities are doing, and based on the tool. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Olivier, would you like to do that, or should I take the first?
I can start and then you can add information. So yeah, I mentioned earlier the methodology are the same from a city to another. So we were able to create some statistics to compare the cities, for example, the canopy index. We look also, we haven't talked during the past hour about the resiliency of the natural infrastructures. So we look especially to trees, municipal trees, and also woodlands when we had information about them. And we look at how they are resilient to future climate condition. So from a city to another, the climate conditions are different. In the future, they will be different. So we were able to compare each city to each other about that. We looked the heat island and cool island as well. So just knowing like the area of cool island, heat island, and yeah, there is other statistics. And I think like some cities were interested about these statistics to just compare to each other, especially like I'm talking maybe more about the Quebec side, but like, for example, Quebec and Gatineau, they are not in competition, but they are really close to each other. So they were interested to just compare the statistics about how much the improvement of air quality through their trees. Yeah.
Great. So I have a very specific question here in the Q from the Q&A. It says, I'm wondering if the models are using flow direction and flow accumulation data derived from DEMs, I don't know, and would it be useful in providing insight around transport of sediment and pollutants in stormwater and meltwater runoff from industrial sites to natural values being identified for protection? So it sounds like, would you be able to see like the flow and where these things are going and how industrial to natural areas might be something to look at?
I can start, and Sylvia again. So that's a really good question. And in some context, we are using like the direction of the flow, so the DEM, so the topography, to know where the water is going through, but it's more at the watershed scale that we are using this kind of model. But like at the city scale, we decided to use another model which doesn't take into account the topography. It's just saying there is a droplet of water hitting the floor. Is it gonna be retained, absorbed by the soil, or is it gonna to run off? So this analysis is more about knowing where there is like maybe too much build-up area, where it can be like fast runoff. But yeah, because the city are like the model we use, we decided this approach because it was a bit easier.
And maybe I'll add to that city landscapes are very modified in terms of having sewer systems and water transportation networks underground that we're not able to see necessarily with the tools that we're using. And so this was meant to be a sort of a very first high level perspective on where are you likely to have a lot of excess runoff being created on your landscape. And then I think, the value of putting these data sets in the hands of those decision makers is that can then be crossed with more fine scale data that people in the city department, whether it's the Green Infrastructure Initiative in Vancouver, they can cross that with schemas of their water distribution system to identify, do they have enough capacity and where might actually adding new green space help to address these issues where there's too much overflow happening or overland flow happening to help slow that movement of water. So I think we're not trying to be the completely be all end all of these tools, but to really give a perspective on how we see natural infrastructures providing a service with regards, in this case, to water retention and flow.
Great. And maybe, and anyone could answer this, like, could you explain, this is from someone who's with Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada, asking about how municipalities could use this tool to inform climate adaptation measures.
I mean, I think my first example was the start of it. The heat response. We didn't have heat island map before this, and so this has kind of been the first way for us to visualize where we may need to look at. I mean, we already anecdotally know where we need to have cooling stations in our city during heat events, but this kind of helps us refine that and really understand what services might already be available in those areas and what we might need to be adding. So that's definitely coming from our climate adaptation side of things, more than from our natural infrastructure project team. So it was interesting that they kind of landed on this tool before we even did. And we'll also be continuing our work with Habitat, actually on a different contract, to look at how some of our natural infrastructure in Saskatoon may be impacted by different climate scenarios. So there's some initial work done in this tool, but I think we wanted to kind of go even deeper, and so we'll be working with them to continue that study.
Great.
I think
Olivia, Sylvia, did you want to add to that?
Well, maybe, and I wasn't sure if we wanted to open up the map again and look at some of these climate variables that we've produced, but some of the things that Olivier didn't show in his sort of demo of the tool is these other variables that we've calculated, which are really focused for the moment on the forest systems, but that try to identify which parts of your urban forest, whether it be municipal managed trees or the woodlots, are most at risk to different types of either extreme climate events, pests and diseases, or sort of just a shift in climate through time. So these might be able to be transformed into identifying which parts of your landscape are most at risk in the future, and helping to orient, okay, if we're going to we know that we're going to have to, replant some areas, can we think about which species to be planting to be a bit more resilient, that are going to be more adapted to that future climate envelope, or that are going to be less vulnerable to these future pests, which we think are going to arrive on our landscapes in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So that
I think it'd be great, if Olivier, if you were to open up the map and just show specifically that, like that's a great idea. Does that work for everyone? And while he's opening that up, I'll just say too that there are some questions in the Q&A, people just concerned about, like how, what if this is used sort of in a more nefarious way, as like, what if it's going to make it so we focus more on the affluent neighborhoods, we'll get even more, or, would people just use this to so I think, I'll answer the question is that, the full intent and purpose of this map is to help us create better communities, is to make sure that there's not just, finding ways to make the map appear better, but actually that this is part of the reason it's available, not just closed into government, is so that it's accessible to everyone, that is usable by people, to have that information available so that they can advocate for their community, and communities can coalesce around the information that's there, right? It's not closed within any one person's or one government's purview or available information. And I think also, looking at the map, that you can look at it and see other cities and the kinds of things they're doing. It really helps, again, practitioners within the cities who are, excited about doing this work, and citizens who want to sort of rebuild or regenerate nature in their communities to help to do that. So I think, someone asked specifically about Vancouver, there's Core Pacific is looking at Falls Creek North. Can we, use this these maps to do things that are already final. There's always room, I think, whether something's already in progress for people to use maps and use informations to help make better decisions. So I think that is the intent and purpose of the map, and I think how it's used, that's going to evolve, but that's the intent and purpose of it. So Olivia, I'll just hand it over to you to give us a run through on some of the climate adaptation.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So yeah, if we go to the map, like as I mentioned earlier, there is like in a drop-down menu, there is a theme that we didn't cover. So because we are maybe talking about climate resiliency, there is two analyses we've done. The first one is to look at the potential disease, insects, and climate extreme that can happen in the city, and how the trees are able to respond to it. So if I click on it, this analysis for the city of Saskatoon is just for the public trees. So it gives you like how the trees adapted to several threats. So I can zoom a bit and look at a specific tree. So for example, this one, if we zoom at it, there is a couple information in this little text box. So the first one is the name of the tree. So yeah, it's a blue spruce. And then you have a value from 0 to 1, saying if the tree is vulnerable or not. So if it's a value of 1, it means it's vulnerable to lots of disease, insects, is not vulnerable to drought, is vulnerable to flood, etc., etc. And the aggregated vulnerabilities, it's just summarizing all these threats above to have like kind of an aggregated threat score. So it's just like, it doesn't take into account the probability of the threats. It just say if there is a threat arriving, for example, like in Quebec, we talk about a lot the emerald ash borer. If it happened in your city, most of the tree might die. So this analysis quickly show you which tree are mostly adapted or not to different kind of pests and disease and threats. And we've done another analysis about how trees are adapted to future climate conditions. So we would go in here, adapted to future climate condition. We click in here, and it's just gonna display this layer. It's again about just the public trees, and it gives you like a ranking of how it works. And Sylvia, you can just add if my English is not perfect, but we look at future climate condition about precipitation and temperature. So how in 2050 the climate will be in terms of precipitation and temperature. And we also look at the characteristic of the trees. Right now, which quantity of water they need to grow each year, how much temperature range they are thriving in. And based on 5 criteria, we were able to know if the trees are adapted to the future climate condition. And that's explained here. I can just quickly go on the methodology to explain the 5 criteria we use. So the average annual temperature, the maximum temperature of the hottest months of the year, etc., and etc. We use climate data sets, and the ranking of the trees are based on 5 climate criteria, and saying if they are highly adapted, it means none of the 5 climate conditions affect the trees, etc., etc. And if we look at the map, like it really depends from a city to another. So basically in Saskatoon, there is no tree fully adapted to the future climate condition, the 2050 climate condition. It doesn't mean all the trees are going to die. It just like the need they have won't be fully I don't know the word, like just it won't be fulfilled. All the the characteristic of the tree. So, for example, at the city scale, we see in here these trees in a park. We can see which trees is it. It's a white spruce. So in this park, it means it's poorly adapted. So on the 5 criteria, you can see in a little text box, 4 of the 5 criteria, the threshold is passed. So it means maybe all these trees in a park might not survive in 2050. So with this analysis, it helps to prevent a bit how we can prevent and prepare to climate adaptation. And that's maybe not too easy to understand, but we've done another analysis, which is called requiring specific action. So this one, it's giving 4 recommendations based on what's happening in the dissemination area. So it's based on how much benefit you have and how the trees might be adapted to future climate condition or not. So when you are, I can go maybe quickly in a methodology to explain. So the 4, maybe I just go here to explain. So the management action means in this area in a yellow, like there is lots of benefit because the canopy cover is really high, but there is a lot of risk of losing this canopy. So the management action means you have a lot of benefit, but you might lose them. So it's a place where you want to maybe start to take action. So looking at all the trees, which are the most vulnerable to the climate change, to the vulnerability, and maybe monitor these trees and start to maybe not replacing them, but really focus the monitoring on them. So that's the management action. The implementation action, it's where the canopy index, like the benefits are really low, but there is not much risk for the natural infrastructure already here. So it's just like at the city scale, lots of place where you could add trees, and the trees already here don't have much of risk of disappearance. The protection, it's where you have lots of benefits and the trees are already well adapted. So you have nothing much to do in here. So there is a couple area in Saskatoon where everything is great. And then finally, restoration action. It means the benefits are not that high and the nature already here is at risk, sorry. So it's a place where you want to add nature, and also because the nature here is not really adapted, you might lose it. So lots of information. I'm stopping here. I see Panos, you have your mic open.
Well, yeah, so I was really quite impressed with the methodology section, like allowing people to go in and see how you developed it, where the research is. And I think, for a lot of planners looking at that and seeing the type of work that goes into it. One thing that few people have asked about is these sort of like crowdsourced or community-based science, with iNaturalist and things like that. Do you foresee or have you used that kind of community-led science? And if so, how would you show that in the methodology, or like how would you include that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Sylvia?
Well, yeah, I was going to say one of the analyses that we've done in the past, but isn't necessarily in this, is looking at using eBird and iNaturalist observations about where people are observing species. And it's usually a reflection of where are people moving because they want to go observe a bird. And so these are areas that tend to be parklands or interesting spaces along the rivers that are interesting for a number of different reasons. And so I think, and so we tend to map that to understand for communities and for cities, which places are harboring a high diversity of different bird species. But similar types of analyses could be done with other species groups using those types of data sets. And I think it'd be really interesting to potentially cross them with our connectivity layer. So we didn't really talk too much about our connectivity layer, but we're really looking at like where are the paths of least resistance for animals to be moving through a landscape, not specifically for any one species, but for species in general. And so it'd be interesting to potentially cross data sets that are from community observation, citizen science, with those to sort of validate them and see, are we finding species where we think they would be found? So Olivier has brought up here the connectivity layer for Saskatoon. And so you see, this is a layer that can be interpreted where it's very high yellow, means that this is a corridor or sort of a space where we expect animals to use to move across the landscape. And so a lot of it is focused around that natural feature of a river moving through the city. And the city's done a lot of work to try to make that a manageable open space. And so that really comes through. But you can also see that there are other parts of the city that, you know, because of the high canopy index or sort of low vegetation, is also permitting animals to move across those landscapes. And so it could be really interesting to sort of combine those data sets with what's available here. And so I think that's also the interest, is we wanted to provide these data sets so that people can also see, answer different questions that we weren't able to do in the context of this project. And you know, use those data sets for different purposes and hopefully advance the conversation around natural infrastructures in cities.
Great. So I think we're at a point where we probably want to just, I would love to hear from each of you about sort of your thoughts about this, sort of just sort of closing thoughts for the project, and maybe we'll start with you, Joe.
I'm sorry, that was a super broad question. Can you
so
reframe a little bit?
It's a very broad question. So just like, is there anything sort of that you would like to just to say to people about what either the work that you're doing and in its relationship to the map and the city, of just like something that you're either really excited that has worked, or a challenge that you have, you know, sort of going forward?
Yeah. I guess actually the thing that's coming to mind for me right now, and yeah, I don't, I hope it's not a little bit like off topic, but the world is kind of crazy at the moment, and it's just really encouraging to see that there are so many people that have signed on to this webinar that are really excited about this tool. Obviously, there's lots of great folks in private sector, in nonprofit, and in local government that are working on these things, and I don't know, that has been uplifting for my morning personally, just to be able to kind of share the space with folks and have this conversation. And see that folks around Canada are working on similar sorts of things. I think it's easy to get kind of caught up in your bubble, but really great to like have this reminder that, you know, there's folks in Saskatoon that are, you know, maybe on a similar track as us, and thinking about some of the same things. So really just like inviting connection with colleagues who are doing similar work, and yeah, really grateful to David Suzuki Foundation and to Sylvia and Olivier and Habitat for welcoming us in this project.
Well, the thing that is, I feel exactly the same way when I saw the registration numbers coming in for this, just like that, you know, with all the political chaos and this, there is a, you know, seemingly a movement against sort of expert ideas, and really like coming together and having this long-term planning. I was talking with a medical researcher yesterday, and he was saying he can't even plan 3 months ahead now. So I think that's clear, but I think what this has demonstrated is that there's still a lot of committed people, and seeing everybody joining here, it's really quite hopeful. So yeah, thank you, Joe. Shannon, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I guess just to close, I mean, for me, this whole project has been a reminder that this is an evolving field, and we're still finding our way. And I mean, often Saskatoon is like, oh, what are all the other places doing that we can learn from? So to then suddenly be a location where people are looking to us for guidance, it's been an interesting one. And we are really proud of what we've done, and think that we can continue to move some of this work forward for a very specifically like prairie context, which I don't think there's as much data on. And this is why we want to continue our work with Habitat, is we've got a really good understanding now of kind of our urban forests, and then what comes next. We need more on grasslands, more on wetlands. So I think it's been, yeah, exciting to see that Saskatoon take leadership in this area. And and also just, I think with the tool specifically, again, those socioeconomic statistics overlaid with ecological data, and also that connectivity piece, which we've never seen before, which was just shown in that map, has been really interesting to see how species might flow through our cities. This is stuff that's tricky to measure, and it doesn't land well in like a written form. So to see it visually has been just, it gives us a lot to think about in our planning. So I've been really appreciative of what's been done to date, but we're not done. And we're going to keep going, and we're going to keep partnering and with other municipalities and other groups like Habitat and David Suzuki Foundation. So yeah, looking forward to continuing this work.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Olivier?
Yes, I can have a quick word. It was really a great project. It's been 2.5 years that we're working on it. So it's been a long project, and we had lots of challenges, brainstorm to go through the analysis, how to do it, talking sometimes with the city to change a bit the approach, and finally doing a webinar, landing the different interactive maps. We had a workshop with the cities, and that was really inspiring, or at least it was really nice, because like we were in the same field, and like people are motivated to add more natural infrastructure. So yeah, just the end of the project is really rewarding, and I hope like this initiative might create other initiatives like that, and we would like to do that with other cities as well. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Olivia. And then Sylvia will leave you with the final word here.
I think I'd echo strongly the sentiments put forward by my three fellow panelists, that sometimes, especially as a conservationist, sometimes the pace of change, when you look at the big picture, seems really slow. But more and more I'm convinced that like the municipality and the local scale is at the forefront of moving this dialogue forward. If you want to evoke change, go talk to your mayor, your municipal representatives. There's a lot happening at the municipal scale, which gives me hope every day. And like, as Olivier said, we had really exciting and inspiring conversations with the cities that we collaborated with on this project. And just to hear what these innovative people are thinking about and trying to get to happen in their respective cities is just so fantastic. And, hopefully as much of it as possible gets done. And I think just trying to understand how can we support them through data sets, through visualization, through other types of methods to help make their jobs a little bit easier is what we're trying to do through this tool. So hopefully some of the things that we've been able to share will also land with other communities that are facing similar challenges, but have similar ambitions to make their cities greener and more livable in the future for everyone. So hopefully we'll leave you with some inspiration on our side about what can be done from a data perspective.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for participating today. It is inspiring, and I want to just close with something that Shannon said earlier, which is that it really comes down to people. And this is a great tool, and I really look forward to seeing what kinds of things that people do with this great tool. So thanks again. And a reminder, we're going to send out this as a recording. We'll share contact information. We'll share links to the map and all those kinds of things. So thanks again for participating today, and all the best. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye-bye.